This is part 2 of William Blake. Part 1 can be found on Great Art Explained. The link is below. The English artist and poet William Blake was 32 years old when the citizens of Paris stormed the Bastille prison, signalling the start of the French Revolution. Shockwaves were felt across the whole of Europe. For Blake, the revolution was a powerful source of inspiration. Within a few years, energized by dreams of freedom and revolution, Blake had quickly produced several of his most significant works, including Songs of Innocence and Of Experience. This deceptively simple collection appears at first glance as if it was written for children and nothing more than a collection of nursery rhymes. But hidden within these unassuming poems are radical ideas. In them, Blake reveals his passionate hatred for authority, as well as his contempt for the church and the monarchy. And he expresses his deeply held belief in one of the key values of the French Revolution: liberty. Songs of Innocence and Of Experience was written in 2 parts, intending to show the 2 contrary states of the human soul. The first collection, Songs of Innocence, was published in 1789, and the second part, Songs of Experience, in 1794. That same year, he produced a combined version of Songs of Innocence and Of Experience that we know today. He then printed, hand-coloured and hand-bound around 20 or so copies of the combined sets as patrons ordered them, each one visually distinct. The first collection, Songs of Innocence, was written by the early days of the French Revolution, when Blake and other political idealists dreamed of a new utopia, where reform and social equality were thought to be possible. But by the time he produced Songs of Experience, it was clear that the French Revolution had failed, and the ensuing reign of terror had led to mass bloodshed and the repression of radical thinkers. Songs of Experience are darker, more ironic, full of bitterness and doubt. And yet the divide between the 2 collections is not always stable. Blake reordered the poems many times and appears to have been uncertain whether particular poems fitted better in one collection or the other. Ultimately, Blake wanted us to read the 2 parts of the collection together, and almost certainly imagined them as connected from the outset. He designed several key poems to be read together. For instance, the poem called The Lamb from Songs of Innocence had an opposite poem, The Tiger, in Songs of Experience. Blake doesn't present these contradicting or opposing elements as mutually exclusive, but as integral to each other's existence.
Without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence.
From when he first saw God put his head to the window at the age of 4, Blake experienced hundreds of visions. Angels and demons appeared to him. Renaissance painters accosted him in stairwells, and he regularly conversed with saints and prophets from the Bible. He wasn't the first great thinker to see visions, but the difference was that Blake had the creative skills to express what he experienced. These visions inform much of his work, and Blake describes them in poems from Innocence and Experience.
And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free, and then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river, and shine in the sun. Then, naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind.
What is surprising about Blake's visionary encounters is the way he records them in his poetry, as if they were completely natural, normal experiences, because to him they were. Describing meeting with an angel in the marriage of heaven and hell, Blake writes about the encounter in a voice completely unmarked by doubt or irony.
But I, by force, suddenly caught him in my arms and flew westerly through the night, till we were elevated above the earth's shadow. Then I flung myself with him directly into the body of the sun. Here I clothed myself in white.
And when Blake depicted Jesus in his late poem, The Everlasting Gospel, he wrote as if he was talking about a rebellious, back-talking teenager, rather than the Son of God.
When but a child, he ran away and left his parents in dismay. This is the race that Jesus ran, humble to God, haughty to man, cursing the rulers before the people, even to the temple's highest steeple.
Blake's visionary encounters are powerful because they feel like real encounters, and this is because he wrote about them as he wrote about everything, with an incredible sense of conviction. It has been said of Blake that indifference was impossible to him. He was a poet with a unique sense for the power of the human imagination. He believed most people lived closed in by rules and restrictions, confined by a narrow perception of reality and the limitations of our five senses, and he considered it our duty to free ourselves from this limited outlook.
If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to men as it is, infinite.
For Blake, there is an infinite experience of the world accessible to us in our daily life. He argues that we need to look beyond just what we see or touch and expand our own view of the world by embracing imagination, opening ourselves up to wonder. If we do this, even the smallest thing can contain worlds within it, but only if we allow it to.
To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour.
Blake believed that deeper insight into the human condition comes from understanding and embracing alternative and opposite ways of looking at the world. He felt that emotions, good and bad, should be expressed freely rather than hidden, and we should not shy away from conflict.
I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow.
Blake's poem anticipates the later theories of Sigmund Freud, who suggested that repressed emotions can create damaging, neurotic thoughts and behaviors later. The worsening effects of repressed emotion are described using the extended metaphor of a poisonous tree, which grows more and more as the speaker holds bitterness and resentment within.
And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night.
The most well-known poem in the collection is The Tiger, a portrait of a beautiful and dangerous animal, and which is itself a beautiful and dangerous poem.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?
It is an image of all that is sublime in nature. For Blake, it is not just the beauty, but the ferocity of the tiger that makes it a miracle of nature. And the tiger represents the fearsome power of God.
In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire?
The poem asks us, what kind of God could create something so terrifying, so dangerous, and yet so beautiful as the tiger? Blake's imagery in this poem is dramatic and apocalyptic. Eyes of fire, a violently twisted, beating heart, hammers and chains and a glowing furnace, stars throwing down spears, and heaven bathed in tears.
What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp?
The poem is a torrent of questions, all unanswered. The climax of the poem is the final line of the 5th stanza.
When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee?
In other words, the poem asks whether the same God who made the lamb or pretty flowers or smiling babies or delicate butterflies could also create violent tigers with claws, poisonous snakes, or deadly illnesses. It is a question still being asked today. Shockingly, it is a poem in the 18th century that dares to question God's benevolence. A poem in awe of the variety of the world, but fearful of the mad God who could have created the universe and all its painful contradictions. The Lamb from Songs of Innocence begins with a very similar question to one asked in The Tiger.
Little lamb, who made thee?
But the tone of this poem and its attitude towards God is completely different.
Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice.
In this song-like and joyous poem, we are asked to think of God not as the fearsome creator of a dangerous world, but instead as a protective, comforting force who gives us the gift of life, as well as clothes to wear and food to eat.
He is meek and he is mild, he became a little child. I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee.
In this poem, the speaker explains that God even became a child in the form of Jesus, known also in the Bible as the Lamb of God, and these terms stress God's vulnerability and relatability. The two poems, The Tiger and The Lamb, offer two different ways of looking at God. One innocent way in which God is a source of sympathy and consolation, and one experienced way in which God is a fearsome and untouchable superpower. Together, they demonstrate how good and evil can exist simultaneously under the same God. We are asked to navigate opposite ways of thinking about the world, to question our own biases, prejudices, and our naivety too.
Expect poison from standing water.
Or to put it another way, we stagnate if we are stubborn in our opinions, and this inevitably poisons us.
The one equal the angles of the other. Understand, Browning?
Yes, sir.
Good!
One of the main thematic concerns in Songs of Innocence and of Experience is authority. These are poems full of symbolic authority figures, parents and priests, nurses and angels, people who wield the power to punish or protect. In the Songs of Innocence, the poems are generally spoken by characters who have a strong sense of faith and trust in the authority figures around them. To live in the world of innocence is to have a connection with God and nature, a sense of spirituality and purpose, to feel cared for by those in power and guided by them.
My mother taught me underneath a tree, and sitting down before the heat of day, she took me on her lap and kissed me, and pointing to the east began to say, "Look on the rising sun. There God does live, and gives his light, and gives his heat away, and flowers and trees and beasts and men receive comfort in morning joy in the noonday."
In the poems from Innocence, we encounter authority figures who are there to protect and watch over us, like nurses, shepherds, angels, and kind, teacherly mothers. But they do not oppress or restrict us. Instead, they teach us how to act and give us space to make our own choices.
And we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love.
By stark contrast, in the later poems of Songs of Experience, we encounter priests who beat children in church and make rules about what we aren't allowed to do, as well as ruthless parents who wrap us in swaddling bands or make us ashamed for falling in love, or cruel school teachers who hammer rules into us when we are young. In the later poems of Experience, the poems are written from a perspective of dire cynicism, and Blake's characters appear jaded about life and often have a hatred or fear of authority.
How can the bird that is born for joy sit in a cage and sing?
Blake was frustrated by the way that organised religion imposed regulations on everything, from what we eat or drink to our sex lives.
And the gates of this chapel were shut, and "Thou shalt not" writ over the door. So I turned to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore. And I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds, and binding with briars my joys and desires.
And the Bible teaches that the wages of sin is death.
Whereas the church says, "Thou shalt not" to alcohol, sex, and other desires, Blake thought desire should be embraced rather than restrained.
Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained, and, being restrained, it by degrees becomes passive till it is only the shadow of desire.
He also believed that parents often try to impart their own constraints and control onto children, right from the moment they are born. As we see in the short poem Infant Sorrow, where the baby's swaddling bands are a metaphor for all the ways in which our parents and the world try to control us.
Struggling in my father's hands, striving against my swaddling bands, bound and weary, I thought best to sulk upon my mother's breast.
Yet it is the apocalyptic poem London, perhaps more than any other, in which Blake delivers his most violent protest song. It is a passionate tirade against the Industrial Revolution, monarchy, the church, and a powerful account of the oppression of the working classes, as well as the poverty and hypocrisy Blake saw every day as he walked the streets of 18th century London. This is Blake at his most political and most subversive.
I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse.
Blake considered every injustice as something to be fought against, and he saw his art as a call to arms, a revolt against tyranny of all kinds.
A robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage.
He was writing during a period of significant political upheaval. The American War of Independence and the French Revolution had sparked high hopes among Republicans like Blake that tyranny might soon be overthrown. Way ahead of his time, Blake condemned colonialism and war, slavery of all kinds, the suppression of women, the exploitation of children and animals, and the injustices of a class-based society. But while the Songs of Innocence and of Experience are inextricably tied to revolution and radicalism, they also owe their existence to mysticism, dreams and visions, as well as to Blake's absolute rejection of reason and rationality. He was a truly revolutionary artist with a remarkable and complex mind, and a colossal imagination. And his work continues to haunt the 21st century.
A painting by William Blake is to be projected onto the dome of St Paul's Cathedral tonight.
William Blake was a poet who understood that our divided and contrary natures are precisely what makes us better as human beings. It is only our self-imposed limitations that hold us back.
In every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear.